So RFK Jr. was recently on CNN and he made some waves. He kind of upset people by saying that, you know, Joe Biden is a bigger threat to democracy than President Trump is. And also, there's talk about polling where Biden, Trump, and RFK Jr. could potentially be in a three-way race. Now, I've made it very clear how I feel about all three candidates. However, we do live in a republic that practices democracy and democratic values. However, and this is important, everyone has a right to run, and that goes for all independent candidates. Dr. Jill Stein, the Libertarians, other independents, Dr. Cornel West, and yes, even RFK Jr. And as I've said before, the media is on its rush attack to smear and slander third-party candidates, independents, because again, here you have let me go ahead and pause this video here. Don't want to have it interrupting. Where RFK Jr., his name is, we could witness something that we haven't seen before, a third-party candidate, an independent candidate, challenging the two-party race. So President Biden and former President Trump are set to rematch this November after becoming their party's presumptive nominees, which is something I predicted would happen in 2020, as did Daniel, as did Due Dissidents, as did RBN, as did Jimmy Dore. We all saw this coming. But they're all facing a relatively notable third-party challenge from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We all know Kennedy is a nephew of President JFK and the son of RFK Sr. And already, if we're looking at the polls, Trump 49.5%, 39.2% for Biden, and RFK Jr. commanding 9.5% of the vote. And this is one of the most recent polls as it is, where Trump has a 2.3% lead based on 106 polls. So this is rather fascinating. Now, Kennedy has been averaging closer to 10% in polling from the Hill Decision.HQ, making him the highest polling third-party candidate in a presidential race since businessman Ross Perot in 1992. In a five-way race that includes Jill Stein and Cornel West, Kennedy is at a 10% in the Real Clear Politics national average. Kennedy took a step forward the general election last month when he picked Nicole Shannon, a tech attorney and entrepreneur, as his running mate. The decision came relatively early in the general election calendar because some states require independent candidates to have a running mate to get on the ballot. But Kennedy faces long odds to serious challenge to serious challenging Biden and Trump for the election, or even to get a victory in any state based on recent history. Perot was the most successful third-party candidate in modern history, but he only received about 19% of the popular vote and won no electoral college votes. Still, third-party candidates have influenced the outcomes of elections and hold the potential of playing spoiler for a major party candidate, which is complete BS. Third-party candidates are not spoilers. Polls have indicated Kennedy's candidacy may be hurting Biden slightly more, but the difference of impact on Biden and Trump appears to be small, and the results are far from conclusive. So let's go ahead and pull up this interview where good old RFK Jr. was on CNN. So let's go ahead and play this video.
Wisconsin, and out front now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is running, of course, as an independent for president of the United States. And Mr. Kennedy, I appreciate your time. So you're Jeff Zeleny going through the role that Jill Stein played when you just look at the vote tallies in the state of Wisconsin. Only need 2,000 votes to get on the ballot in the state of Wisconsin. So what do you say to Democrats who point to Jill Stein and say, that's going to be you?
Well, right now, I don't know what I'm going to do, who I pull more from in November. Right now, I'm pulling pretty much equally, probably a little more from President Trump. As you pointed out, I want to pull from both of them. But, do you want kind of a glib answer or a thoughtful answer?
I'd always prefer thoughtful.
CNN wanting a thoughtful answer. You get ready for the knives out.
Okay, I mean, what I would say is you have both sides using scare tactics. Republicans say that if Joe Biden gets in, it's going to be the end of the republic. Democrats say if Donald Trump gets in, it's going to be the end of democracy. And I don't think either of them are actually going to destroy democracy. We have institutions in this country that are pretty enduring.
Which is complete BS. There is no democracy, thanks to the Supreme Court passing Citizens United and the McCutcheon's decision. Money is speech. Corporations are people.
And if you look at both those candidates, they're very different in their temperament. They're very different in their ideology. and in their rhetoric. But on the issues where they actually depart from each other, it's a very narrow band of issues, and it's the culture war issues like abortion, guns, the border, and they're all important issues, but they're not existential issues. On the existential issues, neither of them has the capacity to address them. The biggest one being the debt. We now have $34 trillion in debt. The service on that debt is more than our military spending. So, and within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar collected in taxes are going to go to servicing the debt. And who ran up that debt? It was President Trump and President Biden together in just 4 years each. They ran up more spending than all the previous presidents going back to George Washington combined. The chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. It's the biggest issue we have. $4.3 trillion that we're spending on that. And it's 4 times, almost 5 times our military budget. And it's getting worse and worse. You've never heard President Trump talk about it, never heard President Biden. The polarization in our country, again, existential. All of these issues, AI, and neither of them has the capacity to deal with these. And all of those issues are created by a system of corporate capture, this corrupt merger between state and corporate power that has absolutely subverted and undermined our democracy. And neither President Trump or President Biden has the capacity to address it because they're part of that system. They're both being financed by BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, the military contractors, the pharmaceutical industries, and that system just spits out bad policies. And the illusion that if you differ on culture war issues, it means you're radically different. But the real things that we need to do to save our country, they can't do them. And
that's a perfect point to stop right there, because when you look at many of these politicians, they don't have what it takes to fix the issues. Now, do I think RFK Jr. is going to be any different? I think this election cycle has really taken a lot out of me. For example, I am deeply disappointed overall with the entire institution of electoral politics. And I think the only way we can really make things happen and change things is by supporting citizen ballot initiatives. Now, I know what I'm going to be doing on election night. I'm voting third party and independent. If there's green candidates or libertarians, independents, whoever, I'm voting for them. That's how I'm going to do it. My vote will not be wasted on Democratic or Republican politicians. Now, when I look at RFK Jr., there's a lot of things with his campaign that I'm against, and most notably his stance of being pro-Israeli and how he has not moved from that position at all. However, when he is being viewed as a spoiler or as someone who's a threat to democracy, he's not. All right. The real threat to democracy are the people who have remained in power for 20, 30 plus years, our Supreme Court, our corporations who are just controlling everything. So I want to pull up this video here where he is, he's where it's brought up when people talk about threat to democracy that Trump poses. Do you really think that is equal to Biden? This is what's right now getting in the headlines.
But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is it equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court. It shows that he started censoring not just me. For 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was.
So that is something important to bring up on how, and then we're going to rewind that again on how this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, have been going after its political opponents, how it's been smearing and slandering people, how it's been removing people from being on the ballot. I mean, even then, you have Democratic lawmakers who are on the super fast rush to remove Donald Trump from being on the ballot. Now, this goes for everybody. All candidates have the right to be on the ballot. I don't care what office they're running for. We here at Hardlands Media have interviewed a treasure trove of candidates who were running for office and were denied ballot access by both Democratic and Republican lawmakers. And the fact that you have a sitting president, Joe Biden, doing this should be raising a lot of red flags, because I know if this was Trump doing this, People would be out there on the streets. I'm talking to you, you pink pussy hat people. Let's go and play this video. Let's rewind it again, and we'll just enjoy it again.
Different issues. But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court. It shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics. President Biden, for the first president in history, to use his power over the Secret Service to deny Secret Service protection to one of his political opponents for political reasons. He's weaponizing the federal agencies. Those are really critical threats to democracy.
Now, I will say this. If you are running for president, yeah, you should be given that same privilege of security and protection. You know, there unfortunately, folks, there's a lot of whack jobs out there. And even early on when RFK Jr. was in the Democratic primary, and this goes for all the candidates who were running in the Democratic primary, they should have been given Secret Service protection. They should have been given all the same privileges. But however, that wasn't the case. And we're seeing now how there's this coordinated attack by all corporate media, as I've covered in the previous weeks, how CNN, MSNBC are going on the warpath against libertarians, Greens, independents, saying that they're a threat to democracy and that how them being on the ballot will potentially end a second term for Joe Biden. Now, my opinion is this. Democrats, if you're so concerned that maybe Joe Biden should have been doing a better job when he was first sworn into office, maybe Joe Biden should have been, I don't know, more on point. Maybe Joe Biden should have been more engaged with his voting base. So many voters are being turned off by the Democratic Party. They're leaving the big tent. They're leaving that organization as a whole. Now, it is not my fault that the Democrats did this. Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, Joe Biden, Bernie, AOC, it's their fault. Their fault for assuming that we're all going to fall in line. They didn't choose to make our lives better. They chose to make our lives worse, or either that, just assume that we be okay now that the orange boogeyman is gone. Now, RFK Jr., whatever your opinions are about him, he is running for president. He should be given the same rights, ballot access, security, all of that. Same goes for Dr. Jill Stein, the libertarians, any other independents. They should be given that same respect. And if they're running for office, the ballot access. In fact, it shouldn't be climbing Mount Olympus just to get enough signatures just so you could be on the ballot. But it is what it is, unfortunately, because this was designed by Democratic and Republican lawmakers to prevent you, the American people, from having more choices.
Of course, tried to overturn a free and fair election. He tried to overturn one, right? He's still fighting in court.
Yes.
He said, how is that not a threat to democracy?
Well, I think that is a threat to democracy. If him trying to overthrow the election clearly is a threat to democracy. But the question was, who is a worse threat to democracy? And what I would say is, I'm not going to answer that question, but I can argue that President Biden is, because the First Amendment, Aaron, is the most important. Adams and Hamilton and Madison said, we put the guarantee of freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all of our other constitutional rights depend on it. If you have a government that can silence its opponent, it has license for any atrocity.
So just to be clear, you're saying you could make an argument that President Biden is a worse threat to democracy than Donald Trump. That's what you just said.
And that's going to really upset the latte drinking liberals. I can't believe that independent said that. Well, it's true. And we are seeing so many Democratic lawmakers and state's attorneys saying that Trump shouldn't be on the ballot. Well, why is that happening? If that was Donald Trump, or Republican law, and obviously, here's the thing, Republican and Democratic lawmakers have done this in the past. Way before 2020, we saw how independents, third-party candidates, we interviewed them. We have the interviews. We have the receipts on how many people have been kicked off the ballot. We saw how third parties who are running for U.S. Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives or state level seats, how they are being denied ballot access. This isn't the first time. And yet here we have a Democratic administration that claims to care about the soul of this country, saying that, oh, well, Joe Biden, he's all right. So he has a right to do that. But when you call them out, oh, how dare you? Don't you understand how much of a threat Trump is? Don't you see how dangerous third parties are?
Who else has ever tried to censor? What president in history has ever tried to censor political opponents? What president has weaponized?
Now, I want to pull up this video here as well. Hold on. There's a little bit more here. Because, again, it's also brought up RFK Jr. Are you a spoiler? Are you a spoiler? CNN makes that accusation. And you can't spoil something that's already rotten, that's already been picked clean. You cannot destroy something that's already been destroyed. If you vote independent or third party, if you choose to vote at all, your vote belongs to the candidate that's earned your vote, be it Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, Independent. Your vote belongs to that person because it is your vote. That one person isn't entitled to it. They have to earn it. And what I've made clear is I encourage all of you, my viewing audience, to make that decision for yourself and what's going to make your soul happy, what's going to make you feel complete. And if it means not even voting at all, that's your right as well. Because electoral politics in this country is completely nothing more than a joke. Because we don't have popular vote. We have a thing called the Electoral College. I don't know if this is truly going to be my last election cycle. This very well might be of me participating. But I do know this. My vote is going to go to independents. My vote is going to go to third parties because I want to sleep with a clear conscience. I don't want to be fulfilling my duties or obligations to a neoliberal system that doesn't give a damn about me. So let's go ahead and play this video.
In 2000, Ralph Nader obviously was running, and you did an interview with NBC News just a few months before the election. You said this.
There's a political reality here, which is that his candidacy could draw enough votes in certain key states from Al Gore to give the entire election to George W. Bush.
And then you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. You wrote, Ralph Nader is my friend and hero, but Mr. Nader's candidacy could siphon votes from Al Gore. Mr. Nader dismisses his spoiler role by arguing there is little distinction between the major party candidates and that Mr. Gore is compromised on too many issues. While I admire his high-minded ideals, his suggestion that there is no difference between Mr. Gore and Mr. Bush is irresponsible. In 2000.
So here's the issue. When you have this constant attack of third-party candidates, when you have the belief that third-party candidates are the spoiler or are the threat, the media is going to do everything it can to convince the most diehard voters or those that are easily susceptible to propaganda that voting third party, voting independent will destroy our republic, and that we must comply and we must be patient with our politicians. We must gently guide them. But Democratic and Republican lawmakers are owned by their corporate donors. And so long as that's the case, so long as that truly is the case, nothing will change. Now, I'm not going to be voting for RFK Jr., but his right to run is his right to run. He is not a spoiler, just like how Dr. Cornel West isn't one, just like how Dr. Jill Stein isn't one, just like how any other third-party candidate. They're not the spoiler. They're not the threat. The real threat to democracy is when you have lawmakers and politicians and administrators dictating who and who cannot be on the ballot, and then dictating to you, the voter, who you can and cannot vote for. Now, with RFK Jr. saying that Biden's a bigger threat to democracy, he's not wrong there. If Donald Trump had done this, if Donald Trump was the face behind this, people would be out there on the streets in mass. You would have people calling Trump a fascist, a dictator, a tyrant. He's going to destroy the republic. But see, this isn't Donald Trump that's doing that. This is Joe Biden. You see, when you look at the whole political system, it's designed for one way, and the system is starting to crack. It's starting to fall apart. And this is where our power comes in as citizens. It's right now a sign for us to implement who we are. And I'm going to keep on promoting this. Citizen ballot initiatives. Make it happen live and direct. This is how we get back our power, as we should.